Okay, welcome to Thinking Green. I am here tonight, not live, with State Representative Keith Denning from Wilton, which is the 42nd Assembly District. I think it was a brand new district that was formed with the redistricting a few years ago, and Keith has been representing it this past term. So welcome, Keith.
Thank you very much.
And I guess you can start. I've only met you on Zoom meetings, but talk a little bit about your background, your life experience, and how you ended up being a state rep.
It's kind of an interesting story. I think so. So I'm Keith Denning. I was born in Indiana. I was raised in Indiana. Became a nurse when I was 21. And went to Purdue University, and then went on to become a nurse anesthetist, or some might say a certified registered nurse anesthetist, down at Wake Forest, Bowman Gray School of Anesthesia in Wake Forest. And then after a few years of practicing in Missouri and getting married, having a child, we moved to closer to where our families were and ended up in Cincinnati, Ohio, where I spent about 38 years practicing anesthesia and living my adult life, and being involved with politics, but having never really run for office. And it was during that time that I was asked to go to different countries with Operation Smile and do anesthesia for cleft palate, primarily cleft palate and cleft lip repair. And so I did. My first country I went to was Nicaragua. I then went on to Paraguay, and I went to Cambodia twice. And one of the missions I went to, and I never understood why we needed to go there, but it was the former Soviet Union, Russia, in Novosibirsk, which happens to be in Siberia, where they exiled Lenin to after he had committed his crimes. And so I enjoyed that work so much, of giving these kids an opportunity. And all it was an opportunity to have a better life in the countries where they lived, where the healthcare providers were not there, or nor could they provide the service to these people. And so it was from there that I was asked later on to go with another organization, the Palestinian Children's Relief Fund. And they asked if I would go to the West Bank and provide anesthesia services there in the West Bank. And while you're there with all of these medical missions, you not only provide care, but you train local staff, physicians, nurses to take care of the patients, to show them what best practices are, so that while they may have trouble getting good education in their particular country or updates, you can provide that while you're there. And it was that time that I did for 3 years, I went to Nablus and Ramallah. And then on the fourth year, I went to Gaza. And then after that week, we went over to Nablus and spent a week there.
Wow. So how long were you there altogether?
So I was there. We would always spend about 10 days there. The first 7 to 8 days, you arrive, you do an assessment of who and what population you're going to be taking care of. And that was always determined with Operation Smile. It was always cleft palate, cleft lip. When I was with the Palestinian Children's Relief Fund, it was dependent upon the surgeon. So whether one year I went with a plastic surgeon, the next year I went with a craniofacial surgeon, and the next year after that I went with another plastic surgeon, and the final year I went with a group of 3 surgeons from Chile who were urologists. And so the teams of each country or town would bring their children who they thought could be affected or helped, and we would do a screening on that particular day, and then immediately start scheduling surgeries for the people that we could feel that we could get on the schedule and take care of. Saddest day of any medical mission trip is when you announce and tell a parent you can't take care of their child, either because we don't have the equipment, you don't have the skill available at that particular hospital, and they have to wait for a later day. So, and that was always a sad day, but there were usually, we would do 10 to 15 procedures per day, and we would affect as many kids as we possibly could. And then in those trips, we would, at the end, we would always go to Jerusalem for 3 or 4 days because we needed some downtime before we would go back to work. And so it was a wonderful experience. It was interesting to see how the Palestinians lived. When you first go to Israel and you have to fly into Tel Aviv and you go through customs, and then you have a driver that meets you and you start realizing, well, your driver has a different color license plate than another color, because the Israeli drivers have one color, the Palestinians have another, so that the police can recognize who's driving the car and where. And then it seems like you're just in an American town, and then you go out into the countryside, and all of a sudden you turn off onto a road that is maybe gravel, but surrounded by barbed wire, and you're in the West Bank. And when you get to the West Bank, you see things, you see shepherds on the hill and sheep and camels and a lot of donkeys pulling carts. You see cars. It's just this cacophony of life that you wouldn't know that you were in the West Bank or another country than the West Bank until you start working and talking with the people, and you realize they live under different rules than what you would live under. And it was eye-awakening. It really, to this day, I don't think I understood what occupation meant until I was there and talked to the people and learned that, for example, it affects every part of your life. The electrical service is turned on by someone else. Water is controlled by somebody else. If you want to build a building, you have to have a permit by somebody else. They may delay that permit for years and years and years. Meanwhile, you need a place for your family to grow. If you build before that permit comes in, they bulldoze your house. If one of the members of your family is arrested and convicted of a crime, they may bulldoze your house. The judicial system is, you could be taken at any time. Somebody can show up at your door, take your seven. If you're between the ages of 15 and 17, more than likely you will have spent a night in an Israeli jail. And they almost do it to teach these kids to be afraid of what's going to happen to them if they cause any trouble. You also learn that the Palestinian Authority is not that good at administering a government or a healthcare system. But you also realize that they're under a tremendous amount of pressure to provide services as well as to not provide services. And the dynamics between being an Israeli citizen and a Palestinian is one of somebody who I would never want to live under. And I've said this publicly. I would rebel against this kind of lifestyle. And even when I went into Gaza, that was probably the most severe, because for me to get into Gaza, I had to have a letter from the Palestinian Authority. I had to have a letter from the Israeli government allowing me to go. I had to have an invitation from the organization that was asking me. And when we got to where we were supposed to go, I had to wait outside the building, which was, again, encapsulated in barbed wire. And then when I was invited in, I put my luggage in one booth, and then you close that door, and then you go to the other booth, and you stand in a room that is about 6 by 6 with 6 foot high, or probably 8 foot tall metal barriers, looking up at somebody who's behind a bulletproof glass. And they're asking you, why are you there? What are you doing? Your luggage, meanwhile, is being taken off. And before I had gotten there at the airport, when I found out that I was bringing medical supplies to Gaza, the airport authorities took all my luggage of medical supplies and said, you can't have this. You're basically carrying in goods that should be taxed. You can't just smuggle goods into a country. And I said, this is all charity donations that had for medical care. And they said, well, you can come back tomorrow and we'll give them to you then. And I never did get those things back. The bags were gone, as well as all the supplies. And that's when I realized something different was happening for my other trips. When you get through the interrogation of why you're there, a door opens, you can go in, you can now collect your luggage. All of my luggage, what was left of it, had been dumped out into a bin. about a 3 by 3 foot plastic bin, about maybe 8 inches high, and they had gone through everything. And so I packed it all up and then went to another door, and there's a corridor. It's about 1,000 yards long, and it's in fencing, and it's on the top and around. It's so that you can't climb over, get in any other way. And what's interesting there you can rent. Somebody will carry you on a little tuk-tuk or a bicycle for $1 to the main entrance where you can meet your car. And I said, well, why can't you walk? Can't you go outside of here? And they go, they've got landmines all along the fence. And you realize then that you're actually in a prison. There are metal walls. All the entrances are barricaded. You can't drive in or out. And then when I got to my car, I met Steve Sosovy, who was the chairman at the time and founder of Palestinian Children's Relief Fund. And we met the other surgeons, and we all met, and we drove in to our hotel. And I was stunned. It was a beautiful limestone, I believe limestone or sandstone hotel, had the most beautiful mosaics and artwork and rooms. I have never stayed in a hotel as beautiful as the one in Gaza in my life. It was 2 blocks from the ocean, or the Mediterranean Sea, I should say. The people were charming. Everybody was helpful. And I thought, how could this be here behind, how did they do this? And so we would go every day to the hospital. We had to drive. You drive along the road that goes along the Mediterranean Sea, and you would see the different refugee camps. And the refugee camps were formed when Israel was formed, and the Arab population was forced into these small enclaves where they lived wherever they could because their land was now gone. And if you talk to any of the Palestinians, that's their biggest loss, is they were people of the land at that time. They all had their own farms, they had their own vineyards, they grew their own crops. In 1948, all the land was taken and it was delegated to be the Israeli state, which is fine, except there were no reparations for any of the land that these people had. And many of the people who, to avoid the fighting, might have gone to another village to avoid the fighting. When they came back, they said, oh, you abandoned your house, and now it's ours. And so that underlying tension still exists today. And this is what I think, in my opinion, until that underlying tension is resolved in some way, I think there's going to continue to be tension. But I found the people in Gaza the same as in West Bank, and actually the same as in Jerusalem. People are friendly. They want to be friendly. They want to be helpful, unless they want to steal your luggage at the airport. And then they're maybe not so nice. There are underlying tensions to get in and out. Once you're in Gaza until you leave Gaza. But when we were in the West Bank, we could go to parts of, you could go to Jerusalem and back, depending upon who was driving you. And you could also, like Bethlehem is in Nablus, but to get there, you have to go through parts of Israel and then back into the West Bank again. And I'll talk a little bit about that with settlements in a minute. But people were very friendly. We did surgery in Gaza for, I believe, 6 days. And the children there, it's very poor. I found Gaza much more poor. Excuse me, little sip here. Than what I found in the West Bank. Every morning on the way to the hospital, we would pass men wearing black scrubs running in the streets, not really good shape or organization. But we were told, oh, that's Hamas. That's the organization that manages our government here. And they said they come out every morning and practice. They weren't carrying guns or anything. We never saw a violence or people acting out in any way. We were welcomed by everybody. Everybody told us, I would ask them, how do you build these places and how do you live with, these gates that are closed? And they said, well, everything comes through the tunnels. And that's when I realized what the tunnels were for. And I said, well, what do you mean? And they said, well, we have tunnels that run basically underground because the Israelis won't let us bring things in overground. So we bring them in under tunnels in Egypt. And they said, Israel knows where all the tunnels are. They already know. And if somebody does something they don't like, they'll bomb one of the tunnels to slow down the economics of going in and out of Gaza. And it all made sense to me, because if you can't move things above ground because the controlling interests wouldn't let you, you got to find another way to have a commerce and an economy. So I hear all the time in the press that Gaza has all these things and they're used for military purposes. And I thought, well, they could be used for military purposes, but for the most part, they were used for transportation of goods and services that the Israelis wouldn't allow otherwise. And so it was an eye-opening experience for me. I've always looked at the press that comes to America from my experience there to be diametrically opposed. You never hear like the settlements. So now let's get to the settlements.
I wanted to ask you just for a second, what years were you there?
I was there between 2008 and 2012.
Okay, because I was curious. I was in Israel between 1969 and 1974. And so for me, it's eye-opening to see how things changed, because when I was there, it was a soft occupation. I don't know about Gaza, but the West Bank was totally open. There weren't checkpoints, there weren't walls, you could just drive straight through. So things went downhill after 74.
They did go downhill. There were a lot of Palestinian attacks that they were attacking people in Israel, and Israel put the border wall up because that was to ensure safety. It makes sense to me, but it dynamically, if you're going to have, well, I think the delay in just establishing a Palestinian state has caused some issues. For example, there's land that was determined to be set aside for the Palestinian state. It is now considered to be occupied territory. However, after the fall of the Soviet Union, Israel saw an opportunity to bring in and manage their population and invite Jews who had been in the diaspora of the World War II still could come home and live in Jerusalem and in Israel. However, where they built these settlements was what they would do is they take a hill, and they were building them in the West Bank, and you can see it repeatedly. They take the highest hill in the area. They build accommodations for up to 70,000 people in multifamily homes, multi-storied homes. And then they would build a road in and out to Jerusalem or the Tel Aviv or wherever the main access highway was. And then they would move a mile out and put up a barricade fence around, and they would just take the land and say, okay, this is now a settlement. And there's a big pro-settlement movement to take over the Palestinian territory. People are afraid to leave their property because they're afraid that somebody will come and just stake their land on it. And especially in East Jerusalem, there have been cases where Arab family will leave the house and there's no one there. And when they come back, some Israeli family has come in, taken over, thrown all their goods and possessions out on the street. And now the police are saying, well, you don't live there anymore. You don't even have your things in your house. And so you obviously didn't own it. And so this treatment of any population is going to lead to resentment and hatred. And I saw it over and over and over again in stories and what I was learning about what people had experienced. And, the settlement population now is almost 150, 200,000 people. And there's now a push to even resettle Gaza, which is its own political nightmare because Hamas, which is listed as a terrorist organization, at one point tried to get a relationship with Israel and the United States, and we turned it down. And you can point fingers back and forth until forever. But the point is, until these people feel that they have a place that they can have as their own and manage it as their own and treat it with respect with their neighbors, their peace is going to be hard to achieve. You and I said this after my last trip, this is what got me in trouble. I said, if I had lived in Israel or Gaza, I probably would be a member of Hamas and consider myself a freedom fighter, much like a patriot in the United States did when we were fighting for our own independence. And I said, I believe that the trauma that was visited upon the Jewish population from the Nazis is being placed now on the Palestinians. And since that time, I mean, that was 14 years ago, trauma research has exploded. And we all know now that people who are traumatize. And so you have to break that cycle somehow. But no, it's from that experience, I have always been a supporter of a Palestinian state. I still believe in the support of a Palestinian state. I also believe in an Israeli state. I believe that there are political forces both in Israel and the United States and in the Arab world that do not want to see this come about because it's too convenient for them to manage their detriment using these people as pawns.
I think you're right. I mean, I more think that we should maybe try to go the route of South Africa when they ended apartheid and make one democratic state, just because I can't imagine moving all the people in settlements back to the right side of their line. You know,
I agree. Yeah,
it is hundreds of thousands of people. One of the settlements, I was doing some research. I mean, it's the size of Danbury, Connecticut. It's got a population of like 85,000 in one large settlement.
Right.
But I kind of look back at the history, and it's a very strategic location globally. So it seems, if you look back 3,000 years, every superpower of the age wanted to go through that area.
Yeah.
Whether it was the Assyrians or the Babylonians or the Persians or the Greeks or the Romans, they all wanted that strategic area. And I think that the people who actually lived on the ground have not had more than a few hundred years of like self-determination. And part of me feels like the rest of the world should just like butt out and let the people on the ground. Maybe it's beyond the people on the ground just working it out together. But 50 years ago, I felt like there was a possibility that people on the ground could work it out. I happened to be there during the Yom Kippur War.
Okay.
And I lived in the very northern corner of Israel, like within sight of Lebanon, which has now been totally evacuated. But yeah, so we'd see fighter planes going up, in the sky.
Right.
And we didn't think, oh, is this an Israeli plane or a Jordanian plane? It's like, is this a Phantom or a MiG? We definitely felt like there was an element of proxy conflict in there, that it was the superpowers flexing their muscle as much as the people on the ground, or maybe more than the people on the ground. And it's really, I really agree that people just have to, I don't know, let things get some of the outside influences out of there. It's been noted there is a lot of hydrocarbons in that region, both oil and gas reserves. And, the industrial world is interested in that as well. So,
And it's on the Mediterranean Sea. Gaza is gorgeous. It's on the Mediterranean Sea. But think about it. They didn't even have a port up until when we built them one. And how can you have a country that is going to be called West Bank and Gaza and there's no contiguous? It'd be like saying Alaska and Maine are one country, and it's not going to work. And so I don't know what the answer is. I've been told by the Israelis that if they were to allow everybody to just become an Israeli, they would not have a Jewish state because they would have more Arabs voting than they would have Jews voting. And I'm thinking that in a democracy, do we want to have a Jewish state or do we want to have democracy? And if it's a Jewish state, is it a theocracy? And the same thing we have this conversation now going on in the United States. Do we want a democracy or do we want a theocracy based on Christianity? And my answer is always going to be, we want a democracy.
And this is a very old question in Israel. I remember hearing people like, Ben Gurion and Abba Eban saying, what are we going to do? The Arab residents have a much higher birth rate than the Israelis. And so are we going to have a democracy or are we going to have a Jewish state? And I'm old enough that I kind of, after World War II and the Holocaust, I kind of get why a Jewish state seemed desirable. But I have to tell you, I wake up in the morning stressing out about what's happening there, not just to the Palestinians, but I think about the Jewish reserve soldiers. I mean, we read in the paper just a couple of weeks ago that there was a soldier, a reservist, who killed himself rather than do a second tour in Gaza. And you think these are, men, a lot of them in their 30s and 40s, maybe into their 50s a little. They have wives, they have kids, and then they're going to this place where they're just demolishing the population that looks just like their family. And, I can't imagine what that the Israeli health system is, as good as it is in many ways, is really addressing the mental health, issues in that population. So I wake up in the middle of the night worrying about them. They're not worrying about me. So the idea that we'll be safer if we have our own state, it might have seemed like a good idea at the time, but I think it failed in that goal.
I think you're absolutely right, and I understand. I mean, the Jewish population throughout Europe had been demonized. It wasn't just Hitler. It was for hundreds and hundreds of years by many, many countries. And so to have your own country where you could say, I can be safe here because leadership is always going to be protecting me, not demonizing me, seems ideal. However, they ended up with a theocracy, and I don't know how well that's going to work in the long term. I do know that without the United States, they could not do what they're doing. And we should all know that as United States citizens. I read yesterday that there are State Department officials who have resigned and have said the war that's going on now is putting the United States at risk because we are supporting the activities, whether you agree with them or not. We are supporting activities that much of the world is appalled by. And they will take it out on us just like they did 9/11. And we should think about that. I'm not saying that we're not supportive of Israel, but we should think about if we had spent the money in bombs and in protective mechanisms in Israel and instead used that money to develop the Palestinian people like we did the Israeli people, would we be where we are today? And this is where I think my motivation comes from, is that we should be much more active in promoting peace in the world than we are supplying arms in the world. And yet the military-industrial complex, of which we were warned by
someone who knew,
a general and a president who said, beware the military-industrial complex. We feed it a huge amount of money, billions and billions and hundreds of billions of dollars every year, without question by either party, to say, hey, are we spending too much on defense when we could be spending more on education, development of food supplies, fresh water supplies, disease control, healthcare? And instead, our insanity, and I believe it's a mental insanity with not only Americans but other people in the world, is that they believe that having weapons makes them safer. instead of having all these other good things in life. But
Yeah.
that's me. I know I'm countercultural, so I
No, I
understand.
agree. My house, we don't have an alarm system. We feel like, if you have good relations with your neighbors, everyone kind of watches each other's house. It's cheaper and it works better than, a security system. We could do that on a global basis. One of the challenges, though, is that in Connecticut, and I'm sure in many other states, our economy has become increasingly centered around that military industry. In New London, so much of the new housing that's being built is specifically targeted towards growth in the electric boat workforce. So
Yes.
we have kind of a surge of homelessness because of like cheap rentals for service workers are really like getting bought out and you know fixed up and becoming luxury housing. And it's a real issue because now people think, oh, this is our, economic answer is to build submarines, and we need those 2 submarines a year at least to keep our local economy booming. And so
Right.
we get into a kind of, not just the perception of having more safety with more weaponry, but that it's the way people can individually and as families get a good life.
Exactly. And so transition into 2022. Now I have moved to Connecticut to be closer to my kids, my one child who is now married and was having grandchildren. So my wife and I moved to Connecticut 2017. I run for office as I was asked to. All I wanted to do was be on the Planning and Zoning Commission. They said, "Would you run for selectman? We need somebody to run for selectman." I said, "Okay, I'll run for selectman." I ran, but I lost. And then they immediately opened up the new 42nd district, moving it from the east to the west, Fairfield County, due to the census changes. And I said I would run, and I couldn't find a treasurer, and I couldn't find anybody to manage my campaign. And since it was a new district, no one really had any experience in Wilton as to how to do this. So I hired a Blue Edge Strategies, and they said, you just have to go out and knock on 4,000 to 5,000 doors. And I thought, oh God, I can't do that. But I did. And so I met everybody in Wilton. I learned about the issues. I educated myself. And what you're talking about is one of the issues, is that everybody says we need more jobs in Connecticut. And I go, that's great. Where will we put them? And they go, well, can't they move up? This is the irony of it. They go, can't they move up like Route 8? Isn't that where, that's where all the old factory jobs used to be? And now I'm saying, but what about here in Fairfield County, where if Apple came here and said, we want to build a 200-acre complex, where could we build it in Fairfield County? New Canaan absolutely would say no. And Wilton and Ridgefield, and they would all go, oh, it has to be somewhere else. Do it somewhere else. And so one of the great downfalls of Connecticut is we have a lot of wealthy people here and NIMBYism. And you're right, a lot of the money that builds Connecticut is either from the financial district or the military industrial complex. And you look at Sikorsky and you look at Electric Boat. And I kept saying, we keep funding these companies, but if we really want to become cutting edge, we need to get out of just being built on a war machine and get into the technology centers, which is one of the companies in ASML, which is here in Wilton, that builds microchip. They build the machines that make the microchips. And I go, this is how we could change our economy. Instead of, like Sikorsky said, when they announced that they weren't going to get the Sikorsky order, the governor and 2 senators immediately went up to the Pentagon and said, what are you doing to us? This is our economy. We want to win an election again. And we need these helicopters. And the reality is we don't need helicopters anymore. We need drones. And because bombs are being delivered by drones and messages are sent by drones. So the military industrial complex just keeps growing into new technology also. But you're right. learned in the State House how much of our uh, infrastructure and our economy is built on the military-industrial complex. And if we're smart, if we want to be smart about this as a state, we should re-examine that and decide that maybe we don't want to build the rest of our economy on just developing a new infrastructure or continuing that. New London is always going to be, because it's a deep harbor that they can get submarines in and out of, there's only so many places you can build those. Right. And so that's always going to be there until someday when we have people who have had enough death and destruction and war say, you know, if we want to build submarines, we need to do it for research and development of our underwater world and not for the destruction of mankind. And so I don't think we're there yet. I did serve in the legislature. I found it a very interesting experience. I had never served in public service before. There are some frustrations that I found with it. For example, the rules that govern the legislature are the rules that decide what bills move forward, what bills don't move forward, because it's not that you just have 151 people voting on any particular issue. You go to committees and each committee has to pass a bill. And if there's not enough support in that committee, then the bill doesn't move forward. And new legislators are not in that process of vetting which bills, because it's very much controlled by whether you're chair of a committee or a vice chair of a committee, or whether you're a ranking member of the opposition party. And this is why, and this is the same thing in Washington, is that, and then for a bill to move on to the floor, they know that there's only so much time that they have in session to get bills through. And if somebody says, I'm going to filibuster that bill, and I will talk about it for 3 days if I have to make sure it never goes through, they can stop it. And that's what we're seeing both by our own party, who, for example, medical aid in dying is very popular. Most people support it. We can't get it through because of the chair, the Democratic chair of the committee is Catholic, and he doesn't believe in it. So one person can shut the bill down. All he has to do is say, I'm not going to move forward on it.
It's funny that you mentioned that bill, because I had on our public access show some people who were working on getting that bill passed, people from the Humanist, Association here. And then some people who were friends of friends are on the other side of it, the Catholic side of it. And yes. And they wanted, to present a counterpoint. And I said, well, yeah, we believe in the fairness doctrine here, but I just can't host it. So I found someone else who did a good job hosting it, but I don't invite people on that I want to argue with.
I get that.
I don't feel like I have to disagree 100%, but I really just think that, it's kind of like the abortion issue. If you think it's wrong, you don't have to do it that way.
Exactly. It's my body, my choice. I find it interesting that the rules are preventing us. And the same rule we're having, we have a majority in the House, majority in the Senate, and Democratic governor. Everybody says, every Democrat I talk to says they are concerned about environmental bills, that we are boiling ourselves on the planet and we need to do something. Nothing happened. And it's because of the rules, not because we couldn't vote on it. It's because there was a rule that said we couldn't vote on it, because we had one Republican senator who said, I will filibuster it and it will die in the short session. And my complaint with the rules, and I have made this, is that there is a rule also that says you can call the question. And if you're not familiar with this rule, it's during a debate, after so much time has passed, if you feel like everything has been talked about, you can call a question, which means we vote on it now. And then the vote is there. Two advantages to this. One, we talk too much, we vote too little. If we have a majority and the majority wants it, we should pass. If we have a majority and the majority doesn't want it, it should not pass. If somebody is in the majority and they're not voting the way you want them to, you should know that so that you cannot vote for them the next time. But instead, the way the game is played is that no vote is called unless they know it's going to pass. And that way, everybody knows that they're going to have a positive outcome on this particular bill. What a horrible way to run a country, a government, a state house, the country club, for God's sakes. Talk about it, discuss it, vote on it, and decide whether to move forward.
Wow. On planning and zoning, of course, there are default, decisions too. If things get put off too much, it just, passes so that you can't just run down the clock on something. You have to come to a vote at some point.
Exactly. And so I found it very frustrating. I am 66 years old and had retired, ran for office, won, because I knocked on 6,500 doors, talked with a lot of people, and talked common sense. I'm pretty much an economic conservative and a social liberal, and that appealed to many people here in Fairfield County. And when I got to the State House and I realized that I would be mid-70s before I would ever have the opportunity to be in any kind of chairmanship, and I decided that means I can't travel or do anything between January and March for the rest of my life in my 60s, I thought, this is really not for me. And then even more importantly, somebody from a local synagogue found my old Facebook posts that I had posted about that trip in 2012 about if I had been a member of Hamas, I would have been a freedom fighter because I felt. And then my issue and trauma, and they basically, the anti-Semitism calls started. And the local press got a hold of it, and they came at me. And this, coupled with what I had pretty much decided not to run, I had gone to my local Democratic town committee and said, let's talk about this so I can explain to you why this is all happening. And what I found was the local chair of the Democratic town committee was very angry. He said he would no longer support me. He told that to other town officials and Democrats. Even our local school board chair, who I had helped nominate by going door to door last fall, was screaming at me in the meeting because she was Jewish. And what I found was an incomplete lack of intellectual interest in understanding why I would say something like that. And I basically felt like I had lost the support of the Jewish community when I had people calling me up, and I take all my calls, I answer all my letters, and saying, I didn't realize when I voted for you that you were an anti-Semite. And I said, I don't think I'm an anti-Semite. I think I actually respect most religions more than most people respect religions. I said, but I can't not see what I saw when I was in Palestine. And what I said then, I said, I may not use the word Hamas after October 7th, like I do now, or like I did then, but the reality is the same, and we should talk about that. Well, nobody wants to talk about things anymore. I was canceled. I found I had no support, was not invited to be back on the Democratic Town Committee. I have since left the Democratic Party because there's I think it was Mark Twain that said I would not be a member of any
club that would have me.
Any organization would have me as a member. And I take it with pride. I did consider an independent run or a Green Party run, but my wife has decided that I am done with politics if I want to stay married to this particular woman. And I do want to stay married to this particular woman. So
there are other ways to do politics. People need to be, behind the tables voting, but we also need to be in the streets,
Exactly.
Sometimes.
And I think I'm doing my part now. And this is what I want to continue to do. I want to educate people as to the process of why whether it be Mitch McConnell or whether it be Ritter in the House, in the State House, why one legislator can stop the entire process of political movement by not calling a vote or manipulating it so that it won't pass or it will pass. And that is the art of politics. But that is not of the people, by the people, and for the people. That is the art of how political leaders keep their own power. And I think if more people were aware of how non-functional the system was, they would want new rules to govern the system. And I think they're like me. They just thought an issue came up, you all talked about it, you voted on it, and if it moved forward, it moved forward. It's not like that at all. It's purely whether certain individuals, and I would say there's probably 10 people in the legislature and maybe 10 lobbyists that decide what will and will not be voted on. And I don't want my country running that way. And if you can get people who are in government to defend what they do, how they do it, then you should have them on this show to talk about it, because I would love to have somebody who thinks that one person can kill a bill to have dialogue and hear him say why he thinks that's effective governance.
Yeah, I know that I've dealt with many of the state legislators on trying to expand healthcare, and some of them are extremely frustrated at the gatekeeping that things can come out of committee, be great ideas, maybe even save money while doing good, and then it can just be allowed to be set aside and die.
Yeah. And I think that more people realize that and learn about that and ask their legislators about that. In fact, my new question to anybody I vote for will be, will you call the question? And if there's something that you want to see move forward, and if they say no, then I won't consider them, because they're part of the problem. And that goes for Republican or Democrat or Independent or Green. I want people who are willing to challenge the system and make it work better for me. And that's what you want too.
So we have just about 4 or 5 minutes left. I guess I wanted to talk a little bit about the subject of terramation and aquamation, just because I think a lot of people sort of have been a little aware of that, and it's a wave of the future, and maybe some people will hear it here first.
It's not even a wave of the future; it's a wave of the past. Up until Abraham Lincoln, when you died, they dressed you in your best, and they put you in a wooden box, and they put you in the local cemetery, and you were buried there. Many times you would have a gravestone. Many times you may not. If your family couldn't afford one, you didn't have one. If you were poor, you may end up buried on top of each other in a pauper's grave, which happened all the time. After Abraham Lincoln died and they wanted to preserve his body on the train back to Illinois, they embalmed him, one of the first to be embalmed. And he traveled across the country embalmed. And the practice has then become one of embalming, preservation of the body. And for many people in the United States, there are some religions, both Islam and Judaism, require very simple burials with a shroud, pine box, and into the ground, and what we call, a green burial. But you can tell especially if you drive through Queens and you see that huge cemetery in Queens that's on prime real estate and supposedly will be for time immortal, did not choose that way. So the earth is warming. Cremation is now becoming much more common because people don't want to be embalmed. They don't want to be buried. They don't want to take up a cemetery. It's a little cheaper, but burning a body still adds about, I think it's 500 pounds of carbon into the air because of the burning of not only the body, but the fuel to do it. So green burial has come back. There are many cemeteries in the area, one here in Wilton that does green burial. but you still need to take up land. And land is, if you're going to take up land for cemeteries, you can't use it for food production, for housing, for any other thing you want. So when you go into the legislature, the first 10, after you are elected, up until like the first 10 days after you are sworn in, you are allowed to introduce any bill you want in your first year. In the second year, only committees can raise bills. In the first year, I decided that I would look around and see what I could propose. And one of them was ranked choice voting. I proposed that. The other one was terramation. And there were some other bills that I had talked with people, and I put them in. By the way, none of them went anywhere. But terramation got a lot of press. And so terramation is a process that was developed by a woman out in Seattle, whereby upon your death, you are encased in a airtight container, and you are packed with wood chips on below you and above you. You can have this done with a ceremony where the family can come in and put a cotton cloth over the body, and then put funeral flowers and the wood chips and cover the body. And then it is then encased into this compartment where heat and moisture is added until the natural decomposition breaks down. Between 130 and 150 degrees, I understand, is what they're going for. And so if you're not composting fast enough, they add a little heat and moisture. And if they don't worry about slowing you down, you're not going to catch on fire. And then after 30 days, you're pretty much broken down into dirt. And then they take that dirt out of that compartment and they put it into another box. They're maybe a 4x4 box. And they let the process continue there, so that by the end of 60 to 90 days, you are compost. And if you have any metal in your body, they take that out. And at that point, your family can come and pick you up. It's about 250 pounds of dirt at that point with both the body and the wood chips that were in it. You can donate it to memorial gardens. You can use it for reforesting lands that were toxic at one point. And I've heard about 35% of the people do this, they will take the dirt back and they will put it into a green cemetery, which now that it seems strange to me that you would dig up the ground, put 250 pounds of dirt into the ground, and then cover that dirt back up. But I think that's one of the choices you should have. My wife and I have both decided that we want terramation because of the natural decomposition that we're asking for. We really are stardust. The same chemicals that were here when the earth formed are right here now. And we're just made of those. So we want to return back to the earth. And we can donate it to the local garden club. I don't care what they do with it. It's dirt, and it's not me anymore. I used these chemicals while I was alive. Now I'm dirt. Do whatever you want. Resod the lawn if you want. I don't care. But we won't have a cemetery plot. There will be no headstone. We don't plan on having, we want our environmental degradation to be as small as possible. The other bill that happened to pass this year, the other way to do it is aquamation, which is when they put your body into a container, fill it with a highly basic compound, and you basically dissolve into the water with a few bones left over that can be crushed, same as with cremation. And then the water can be put back into the toxic, down and be treated. Water can be put in the ground. It's water. It has some amino acids in it and proteins that are left over. But aquamation, terramation was accepted by half of the legislators, but some of them were really turned off by it. And then the funeral homes and society was really concerned about it because it was their lobby. This year, though, without a word, terramation came back up, and everybody said, "Oh, we need to learn more. We can't do it. It has to be, we have to do a study." That's what they do, and they want to delay it for a year. And then, but aquamation was sold as a form of cremation, and it passed on a simple vote. And, and so I find the legislature is kind of amusing because they didn't ask anything about what do you do with the water, or how much water do you get back when you die. But with Earth, everybody had this concern about it. So I'm hoping that bill will pass. It's something that I want to do in the future. The disadvantage of terramation right now is that the only center that does it in the United States is between Tacoma and Seattle, which means they would have to fly my body out there, which would, again, increase greenhouse gases to get me there so I could decompose naturally and then fly me back, which would increase greenhouse gases.
Yeah, we need an East Coast location.
So I have asked them for an East Coast location, and I have asked them to please come to Wilton when they decide to open one and we get it approved in Connecticut so we can get one going here. And there's about 15 to 20 states that are now it's approved for. Vermont is way ahead of us. Massachusetts is ahead of us. New York is ahead of us. California, Oregon, Washington. The flyover states are still adopting it, but I expect this to be in somebody's funeral planning very soon. You can pre-plan now. It's about $5,000 to have this done, not including the cost of shipping you back and forth. So
one last question. What are you looking at, the next year holding for you?
Oh, good. I have held it open. I worked for 40 years, and then I went right into the legislature for 2. And I have 3 grandkids I want to play with, and I've kind of held myself back from jumping into anything right now because I think I should take some time and think about this and see what the universe offers me. And the universe has been very kind in what it has offered me so far. I assume that I will be offered something kind as I progress. And so you'll have to ask me that in a year. Okay.
You're invited now to come back in a year. Thanks for joining us. It was nice chatting with you. And I think we covered a lot of topics.
We've been all over
the place. So thanks a lot. And for people who are viewing this, next week, we're going to be talking about the New London Arts Tour coming up. So we'll see you then.